Let's have a look at the currency supply. So pretty much every currency on the planet has devalued at around 90 to 95% over the last 100 years. Now, why is that? Well, if you have a look here, this is the US dollar, and from 1913, where the Federal Reserve was born, it's been like a black or a nice red run at a ski resort ever since, to where it is now, toilet paper, and it's going to continue falling. So why is this? And the thing is, looking at this next chart, you can see that there's a direct inverse correlation between the purchasing power or the value of a currency and the amount that the government prints. Okay, so the more you print, the weaker and more diluted your currency becomes. Because let's take this room for example. Let's say there were only £10 in existence. Okay, there are 10 people here, and yeah, there's 10 pounds in existence. Well, the second I print another pound and inject it into this ecosystem, it instantly dilutes the value of every other pound in existence. So it doesn't matter how much you print. And the thing is, Emperor Diocletian, back in the Roman times, he went through the world's first hyperinflation. And the reason it started off like that is because they had, I think it was gold denarii, which was the Roman currency at the time. And what happened is that they used to start, whenever an official used to go into a building in order to pay for a fee, they used to clip off a chunk of that denarii as a bit of a tax. And the thing is, the currency supply was starting to dwindle a bit, and then he thought, okay, we're running out of money, we've got wars to fund, etc. What I'm going to do is I'm going to get gold-plated denarii. And that was basically the start of the slippery slope, because he then could start printing way more currency with these gold-plated coins. And yeah, that was the start of his hyperinflation. So yeah, so that's what happens there. And yeah, as you can see with this one here, this is from 1971. It's basically lost 80% of purchasing power since 1971. And you'll see why that's a very important date in a second. This is the currency supply growth of the US dollar from 1918 to sort of about 2011. As you can see, we have a pretty sharp jump here at 2008, 2009, and that's basically due to the economic crash or the subprime mortgage collapse, where it's quite amazing. They spent 200 years basically amassing a total of about $800 billion in total existence. And in the space of, I don't know, 3 or 4 years, they went from $800 billion up to about $2.8 trillion. And now sat here in 2018 as I speak, that it's very hazy. They started obscuring some of the numbers, but it's well in excess of $9 trillion. So the dollar is just being deflated away. It's like a very rapidly melting ice cube. Now, I mentioned a few different gold standards, etc. earlier. Well, here, this will show you what we've had. So in 1883, the German Weimar Republic created the original gold standard, the classical gold standard. So for 1 mark equaled 1 mark's worth of gold to back it up. And then by the early 1900s, most developed nations had conformed to this because it was a good monetary supply, zero inflation, everyone was happy. And then obviously we had World War I, that skewed a few things, and we had lots of deficit spending and reparations, etc. afterwards. And so a whole bunch of European nations went to a gold exchange standard where they partially backed their currency supply. And that lasted for a while until sort of 1944. It was getting towards the end of World War II. The world economy was destroyed. I'm not good at my words. And so pretty much the whole developed world convened in Bretton Woods in America, and they had the Bretton Woods conference. And after that, they basically hashed out this new global monetary system called the Bretton Woods system. Now, I'm a simple Norwich boy from Norwich, and even I could see that this was a big pile of poo, but the world leaders at the time didn't, so there must be something else going on here. But what they did is they backed the US dollar and the pound. The pound is like, It's like Batman and Robin, except the pound was pretty much useless. But so I'm just going to talk about the dollar. So they backed the dollar by gold. So gold is at the top, the dollar is below it, and it is backed by gold at $35 an ounce. And they fixed the price of the gold-dollar ratio. And then they backed every currency on the planet by the US dollar. So the dollar, by default, was the new global world reserve currency, and it was backed by gold. So the Bretton Woods system was this weird sort of pseudo gold standard. But then we have this video here.
I have directed the Secretary of the Treasury to take the action necessary to defend the dollar against the speculators. I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets, except in amounts and conditions determined to be in the interest of monetary stability and in the best interest of the United States.
On the 15th of August 1971, Nixon screwed over the world for at least the next 50 years, and he basically severed the gold to dollar convertibility. So which meant that the US dollar turned into a fiat currency overnight, which then made every currency on the planet a fiat currency overnight. Now, what do we know about fiat currencies? 100% failure rate. Average lifespan is about 25 years. Some go on to about 40, but the average is 25. And gold will eventually win. And it's interesting, he said, defend the dollars against the speculators. Well, what was actually happening is the speculators was really France and Europe. So what happened is during World War II, most European nations sent all of their gold over to the US for safekeeping, and that was one of the main reasons why Fort Knox was created in America. It was basically to harbour the world's gold. But the thing is, America got greedy because they were like, oh, we got all of this gold here, and they started printing dollars in according to how much gold was in Fort Knox, not by the gold that they owned, but by how much gold that they were sort of keeping. And Charles de Gaulle, the ruler of France at the time, was a very switched-on guy, and he knew exactly what was going on. He could see that the US currency supply was burgeoning, and he saw that this was basically global economic fraud that the US was carrying out. And so after World War II, around sort of the late 60s, France started to demand its gold back. The US said no. France said, yes, we want our gold back. Nixon said no, and then France sent a few warships over to the US, like really, you know, as a strong show of force. And then eventually they got their gold back. And then following suit, everyone else followed. Following suit, yeah. Many other European nations trying to start demanding their gold back. So what happened was that this golden rug was being pulled out from underneath the US dollar. And so Nixon had to temporarily suspend the convertibility of gold and then the dollar. Well, it's been temporary since 1971, it's still here. So basically from 1971 onwards, we've had basically what's called the petrodollar system. Well, 1975 really. And so here's what the petrodollar system is. Again, not many people are familiar with what it is, and so we had the oil crisis in the early 70s, around 1973, but basically Nixon and King Faisal II of Saudi Arabia made a deal in 1973 whereby all Saudi oil transactions would be done in the US dollar, okay? So it was a win-win. So the win for the US was that all Saudi oil transactions would be done in the dollar, which meant all of those, basically all the oil money, or the revenue from it would basically be flowing through the US indirectly. And the benefit for the Saudis is that they got US military protection. So they got protection and also hardware. So they got, that's why if you look at the Saudi military, it's basically mini America. They got F-16s, M4 carbines, it's just mini America. And so, and by 1975, OPEC had conformed. Basically, because Saudi were the big boys, pretty much every other oil producing nation conformed to it. So that's what OPEC is. And so from 1975, we've had the petrodollar system. And so even if, I don't know, Belgium wanted to buy oil from Syria, Well, what they would both have to do is convert their local currencies into the US dollar, do the transaction, and then obviously ship the oil, etc. But what this means, because every country needed dollars to buy oil, it was an ingenious move on the US behalf, because that meant every country needed dollars, which kept the value of the US currency up, and that's why the dollar was relatively strong against other currencies around the world at the time. And it is the single reason why the US won the Cold War, because we had that arms race between the US and the USSR, etc. But what the US very cleverly did was bankrupt Russia, or they bankrupt the USSR. They simply could not keep up with the arms race, with the amount of spending that was going on. And the reason being is that since 1975, the US has pretty much had free oil ever since then. So no nation could compete with them. And the reason it has free oil, because don't forget, all oil transactions are done in the dollar. So if they wanted more oil, they could simply just print an extra $50 billion, and then there you go. You buy oil with it, or print whatever you want. So they've had pretty much free, yeah. So this is why, I know this is sounding really controversial, this is why the US went into Iraq and many other places. It's all about protecting the petrodollar system, because Iraq twice, so Saddam Hussein first of all started swapping his oil for food. That wasn't good, because the moment a country drops the petrodollar system, surrounding countries follow suit. And so that's what Gulf War I was about, and then Gulf War II, Saddam started selling his oil for euros instead of the dollar. Yeah, anyway, moving on. So talking about the global monetary system and the reserve currencies, this shows you that the US dollar will not last forever. I speak to so many people who seem to think the dollar will last forever. I think they have confirmation bias, because just look at this chart. The average global reserve currency lasts about 100 years. And that's pretty much what the US has had. It may go on for a little bit longer, but it's not here forever. And I think the next one will be the IMF SDR. So I mentioned it earlier. So it stands for special drawing rights. Now, every time, pretty much every major bailout you've heard or seen over the last 20 years has not been dollars. So they may have said, this company, bank or country was bailed out to the tune of $100 billion or whatever. Well, they weren't actually bailed out with dollars, they were bailed out with SDRs. Now an SDR is technically one SDR is around $1.55, and they get the value of an SDR by a basket of 5 currencies. So the Chinese renminbi, the dollar, euro, pound, and the yen. And so it is world money pretty much. They've just given it a fancy name, and the amount of economists that aren't familiar with an SDR is just shocking. And so what's likely to happen is that the SDR in fact, this is why Russia and China are hoarding so much physical gold, because the way that they're weighting the seat of the table at the IMF is basically who owns the most gold. It's pretty much, it's an archaic rule. Basically, who owns gold makes the rules, and it's getting to that right now. It got to the point where China was importing more physical gold per month than the whole world was producing globally per month, and they've been doing that for some time now. So yeah, just be aware that the dollar is on its last legs. Now, it's not going to disappear, it will just turn into another currency like the Mexican peso or the pound. So yeah, hope that makes sense, and I'll see you in a bit.